Approval of the minutes.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
We have a motion for approval by Dr. Newbill and a second by Ms. O'Bannon. Any discussion on those? All in favor?
Aye.
I will open our public comment period. Please come forward. Please give your name, your address. If you're an individual, we will allow you 3 minutes. If you represent an organization, we'll allow you 5 minutes.
Chair, we have not received any requests to address the policy board this morning.
Not seeing anyone come forward, I will close the public comment period. At this point, we have the chair's report. I would like Ms. Page to please come over and join me. As you know, Ms. Page served us this past year, under the worst of circumstances. You're asked to serve as chairman in the middle of a pandemic. You're asked to convene meetings and conduct business and carry forward virtual meetings. She did that. She did it with style, grace, and professionalism. And we couldn't be proud of you, more proud of you, and more thankful for your service. See this base, but it has Patricia Page, Plan RVA Regional Commission. Thank you for your service. So, you have a thank you for as long as you have a base.
Thank
No flowers in there.
I have to tell you, I am just so honored and so grateful. And with that being said, it is nothing that I could have done, because when it came my turn, and I was like, oh my God, I just learned what all the acronyms mean. And so, and then it was a pandemic and we couldn't meet in person. I was like, I live in New Kent with no broadband. But through all of your assistance, I think that we had a very good year, and I thank you so much for your support. And with that, not only with your support, but there were 2 people, well, 3 include Martha, but there were 2 people that just, they put up with me. I'll just put it like that. I mean, my schedule was crazy and I couldn't get on Zoom, and it has kept me in line, and I am so grateful. So with that being said, I would like for Mr. Parsons to step forward. And so this is a certificate of appreciation, and it reads that this certificate is awarded to Chet Parsons, and it's an appreciation of your tireless hours and dedication to manage not only the responsibilities of the Richmond Regional Transportation Organization, but to take on leadership roles with the newly formed Central Virginia Transportation Authority during a pandemic. This speaks volumes to your managerial skills as well as your commitment to this organization. Signed by yours truly from the Richmond Regional Transportation. We said behind every good man there's a good woman. And so we have Nicole. And so Nicole, this is a certificate of appreciation to you, ma'am. And it reads, this certificate of appreciation is awarded to Nicole Muir in appreciation of you, not only taking on additional workload and duties with the formation of the Central Virginia Transportation Authority, but managing your day-to-day responsibilities of the Richmond Regional Transportation Organization while performing each task at the highest degree of excellence. We, the board and members of the Richmond Regional Transportation Organization, express our sincere gratitude to you, ma'am. And so we are so appreciative of you. And we worked you so hard. We even got a card, a gift certificate for yoga, you know. I'm not into any form of exercise, but I guess you are. But anyway, Mayor, we just want you to know that we appreciate you and all of your efforts so much, so we thank you. Thank you.
This year, we will be returning to having our annual transportation forum. This year, it will be on November 4th, and it will be at the Independence Golf Center in Powhatan. If you've ever been there, it's a world-class golf course facility. It's a very impressive setting. Mr. Gibb Reed, who owns the Independence Center, has graciously extended those facilities to us for our meeting on the 4th. So that's something to look forward to. During executive committee meeting, we had a very good conversation. Mr. Bannon and Mr. Holland brought forward concerns about transportation and transportation funding that really led to a good discussion that's going to facilitate our discussion here at this policy meeting and action by this policy board to address some of these concerns. So if I may call on Mr. Holland first to get us started in what we discussed.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you for this opportunity. I would like to share that I shared earlier with the executive committee that we're concerned as we received notice from CTV that Commonwealth Transportation Board that delayed funding and reduced funding for revenue sharing from 22, 23 to 27, which is delayed and reduced. And we're concerned about that because the timing of it is very ironic with the advent of the CBTA. I'm concerned there may be a supplanting or a movement of shifting funds and requirement of funding to the local level versus the state level. And as was stated earlier, the state has responsibility and should adhere to those responsibilities in every area, transportation as well as education. Specifically, we're talking about transportation here. And I think it's important and incumbent upon us to share with them that we do not wish to have delayed funding, which may change. It may decide 2 years later, well, we changed our minds. There's further delay or further diminish or reduce. And we think that it's important to share, especially in light of the fact that we know the state has approximately more than $2 billion in additional revenue because of the pandemic. And in fact, that they have done a number of issues with collections of taxes. We think that they should certainly honor their obligations to the local level and not push it to the local level to come up with the funding, which is in fact a tax, if you will. When we have delayed money, it's certainly not something I think we should accept. I think we should inform them and let them know, as well as we stated with regard to the federal funding of interstate. The word interstate means federal, is my understanding of that. Therefore, we think it's incumbent upon the federal government as well to honor its obligations to the local level, because we're where the rubber meets the road. And we meet the citizens right in the store. They catch us going in. And therefore, it's incumbent upon us, I think, to share this information via the appropriate bodies at the state level, specifically with regard to revenue sharing and delay and deferral revenue sharing. There is, and I hasten to say this as well, we're talking money, there's a time value to money. Certainly, I can invest the money today and have more money in 27. So that's another factor to consider, the time value of money.
Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Holland. We briefly talked about the fact that we were concerned that the state may be holding back.
Yes.
For whatever reason. One of the reasons, as Mr. Holland suggested, was because of the creation of the CBTA.
Yes, it's ironic.
Yes.
Now, I commented in executive session, our Commonwealth Transportation Board member, Mr. Brown, when he came to our meeting preceding the creation of CBTA, stated to us that the creation of CBTA TA was going to be a new way of funding transportation in Virginia.
Mhm.
Now, if you go back, Virginia made a decision back in 1932 with the Byrd Act to assume responsibility for roads. So now we see money not coming from the General Assembly, but coming from the localities to fund transportation.
Yes.
Now, the concern is that the General Assembly may cut back on their obligation, commitment to transportation, not unlike what they did, with education.
Yes, yes.
Where for a number of years following the meltdown, who picked up the slack? As Mr. Holland has stated, we did. Ms. Bannon, please share your comments from executive session about what you call the CBTA and the National Bill for Transportation.
Well, the reason we came forward with, excuse me, the possibility of a local tax and to fund it with the CBTA and the process of developing the CBTA is because the gasoline tax from this area was being collected, but it was being sent to Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads. In other words, they had more need than we did. And when they did their analysis of how you give points to the system, they gave more points to those. And so our money was going elsewhere, but we still needed it. And we were hearing that we also were going to have to take up the interstate highway. The bill in Congress today, and I hope you will get it and pull it up, has no money, $0 for, it's called an infrastructure bill, and there's zero money in it for interstate. They're federal roads, and through the years, the federal government has passed down funding to for interstates to local, to state governments, and some states have don't know the numbers, but several states have put toll roads on. Others have increased their gas tax. Some have done what do you call it? They've done their gas tax and collecting it not as a lump sum, but as indexed to the inflation rate and things like that. That's going to have to change for a lot of reasons, but I want to get down to the fact that the state was paying for the interstate through the gas tax again and money like that. But then they passed that down to being to the local governments, as we've learned too, we have to match funds. But the whole point that we set up the CBTA for was because we weren't getting our own money back. It was being generated from our area. So I said, well, I guess I remember arguing it and saying, I guess we're just going to have to do something. We didn't want to give up, but essentially, I guess we did. I'll say we gave up in the sense that we didn't fight it. But at this point, not only are we being asked to use air money, not to match even, they're not even sending down the match. And so here we are, we did the right thing to get the match to be sure we get air money, but now we're not getting any of it. I mean, we're gonna have to fund it. That's what we learned with the the transportation, what is it, the 2045 plan, or 2045 plan. We can actually fund it through our CBTA funding. But wait a minute, the whole idea was that it would be matched. And that's what
That was revenue sharing was designed to match 100% match local level.
Yeah, and it's now we're being stuck again. I guess we're being backed into a corner. I don't know what you want to call it. But the thought was that we shouldn't let this happen. I mean, we should talk to our state legislators and tell them that's what's happening here, explain it as clearly as possible. I haven't got all the answers, but I know they're more than what I have said just now. And we should invite them to an event. Personally, I would like it to have it here in a small room so we can get up close and personal. And they should not send their assistants. We could invite the press. I mean, we need to analyze how we approach this very carefully, but I think there's some steps we should take. And that was our discussion at the executive committee meeting. If you want to go to the federal level, I'm not sure we have as much traction unless we go to somebody like the National Association of Counties. And that would take time. I think by approaching it first at the state level, then we can get them here, at least our representatives, Senate and House of Delegates, with the idea that they're here and we actually map it out for them and show them very specifically what has happened. And we did our part. I know there are other areas in the state, the counties along Interstate 81, who have set up their own version of the CBTA. I don't think we have to ask them to be here, but we could find, are they having the same kind of problems, with this? I don't know. That's what I mean. We need to work on this. And this was an issue we felt was that important. It did come up, by the way, when we were talking about the 2045. Mr. Parsons, have I sort of missed the mark on the 2045 issue, or we get
No, ma'am, you're absolutely right.
with the idea that we're being pushed back again? I mean, we're just being dumped on. We keep being dumped on. Okay. But the federal level dumps on the state turns around and dumps on us. I think. Anyway.
So,
Yes. And now we're being told to just do everything with that money. Well, where's the original money that's going up to the state? How come we're not getting any of it back?
so that's the concern. And what we wanted to bring forward to the full policy board was an approach that we agreed to, at the federal and state level. And we've heard Mrs. O'Bannon speak to bringing in the state officials. We know that's possible, that can happen. We also talked about coalescing with CVTA in any of the communications for leverage. Because as Mr. Parsons had pointed out in the meeting earlier, a lot of us are the same people over at CVTA. But we represent two organizations, and they should be hearing from both organizations on this issue. I see Ms. Page is agreeing with me. So the issue before us, what are the actions we as a policy board want to take going forward? And we're in unanimity in executive committee. This is something we didn't want to delay on. All right. So I'll open it up for discussion. Mr. Carroll.
Question to ask also is, what is the state doing with the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority and the Hampton Roads Transportation Authority to determine whether or not are they still matching funds for them? And I know that we had a presentation at the CVTA not too long ago where they talked about, and I think you were there, where they talked about, they had both organizations come in and do a presentation on what their program looked like, how much money they actually were able to leverage, and what the matching funds were like. And so my curiosity is, if those two organizations are continuing to get matching dollars, how come Central Virginia is not getting matching dollars? And that's something I'd be curious to find out the right answer for.
The county's along 81.
Right, absolutely. Other comments?
So how would that,
Ms. Loscolette.
sorry, so what would that look like? Would that be, do you envision like a resolution, a letter? And to who? To our elected officials, state and federal? And then also secondarily, invite them to come. So we're doing a couple of things here. Is that?
Yes. That was my understanding, was the consensus of the executive.
That's correct.
Is that true? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Chairman, what is the timeline on possible elimination of revenue sharing funds? Do we know the timeline? Has that decision been made? Is it in the process? Where is it?
Well, I'm going to defer to staff. And if VDOT wants to jump in, they may.
They don't want to.
I don't see anybody rushing to the mic.
All right, so then we'll make up an answer.
Welcome, Mr. Riblett.
Thank you, I appreciate it. We can certainly bring back kind of a summary of all the revenue sharing changes that are really impacted statewide for all areas. And we can pull a report together to kind of summarize the changes, not only where we've been, but where we're going. If that would be helpful, we'd be happy to do that for your next meeting.
Well, that would address Mr. Carroll's, concern. Are we
Absolutely.
being treated differently?
Yep.
Is there equity here across the different authorities?
Yeah, and we want to know the rationale for the delayed funding changes as well, given the current financial conditions. I mean, this is one of the best financial conditions our state has seen. with over $2 billion in funding. We just want to make sure that we're not being,
Please.
there's a shell game going on, which we have, of course, heard about before, happened with transportation many years ago for those who've been around the table. We like to be straight up front, we like to shoot straight and aim.
Absolutely reasonable question.
Have those decisions already been made then, or, sorry, I was just trying
So
to.
as an example, the delay in revenue sharing from the timing was done back at the early part of the pandemic when revenues all across the board were really impacted pretty significantly. So items like that, certainly those decisions have been made, but certainly part of our report back to you can include not only the decisions that have been made, but the ones that are still pending.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Please, Mr. Carroll.
I think the other point to ask is, I understand that those decisions may have been made out of caution early on in the pandemic.
Yes.
But obviously, we're in a different position now. And I guess my question is, what are they using to evaluate to keep that same position?
We can include an update on that as well, absolutely.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
just want to add a little more perspective to that. The revenue sharing reductions are statewide. It's not focused on just Central Virginia. So those decisions were made back again, like Mr. Riblet said, when the revenue declined. The transportation funding all comes from various sources, and it's very specific. It goes to certain places. Gas tax is a big component. We all know we drove less during the pandemic. So there was a reduction in gas taxes. The extra money that the state has is from different sources. So certainly the General Assembly could reallocate that funding to transportation if they chose to, but we're operating on a set budget that was reduced based on the gas tax going down. So VDOT in itself, we had no choice but to reduce something because the gas tax and our revenues were reduced. And that was done at a statewide level. It wasn't just focused on Central Virginia. So I think everybody across the state is getting treated the same. That there's no specifics related to CDTA being formed in Central Virginia. So I don't know if that helps or confuses the conversation even more, but there was a legitimate reduction in VDOT's budget based on the gas tax accumulating less money during the pandemic. So we had to make the choice, what are we going to cut? And that's where something had to go. The budget went down, we had to cut something. So what we chose to do was keep all of our revenue sharing projects completely funded. We didn't take any projects out of the plan. We just pushed back a little bit further the allocation of that money. So I'm not sure if that helps or confuses, but I just wanted to.
Well, it's helpful from the standpoint of knowing that we're not being treated differently from the whole state, but it's not helpful from the standpoint if the whole state's being shortchanged, underneath, these cutbacks. Because as Mr. Holland pointed out, revenue sharing was an important tool for a lot of localities. Matching funds, you could get some things done.
Yeah.
And I pointed out in the executive session, if you go back and look at your 6-year funds and look at the history of funding for your 6-year funds, in Palatine, we get annually maybe enough to do a driveway, and it has to be a short driveway. So being, all the different pots of money that contribute, you see nothing beside them. You see monies, from telefees, but the other pots of money have dried up.
So, Mr. Chair,
Ms. Page, please.
what Mr. Mann said was helpful, but I have to think about this and we have to think about this. So of course, driving was less. And so the gas tax was cut. However, CBTA and the bill to pass was just passed. So therefore, why was it not more money when we weren't contributing in the beginning? We weren't in the original part of contributing, but then we just did an increase so that CBTA could function. So it doesn't add up.
It doesn't add up.
Mr. Chairman, please, Mr. Peterson.
I think it's probably time to make a motion. So I'm going to move that we ask staff to put together the concerns that have been expressed here this morning and share those with our state and federal representatives and ask them to come and meet us in person as requested.
We have a motion from Mr.
Second.
Peterson.
Second.
Do I have a second on the motion? Ms. Laskowlet?
Mr. Chairman, may I add a friendly amendment to that, we, oh gosh, just went on my head. Something we talked about. I'll take that back.
I would offer a friendly amendment.
Mr. Hodges?
Thank you, Mr.
I'll come back to you, Ms. Laskowlet. I'm sorry.
No,
That the chair signed the letter, so it's not coming from the staff, it's coming from the chairman.
That's normal protocol.
Accepted.
Okay. Ms. Laskowlet?
we had also discussed coordinating with CDTA
Yes.
as well. Do we want to send it from this body and then also send that letter to them? And encourage them to send it as well or
So
sign
your
on
question
to it?
is, do you want CVTA as a co-signee to the letter, or do you want separate letters, Mr. Peterson?
I'm speaking to the TPO today. CBTA has to make its own decision.
I see
I
Ms.
would like
Evans
to
in
have-
agreement with you.
I would like to request as part of that, though, if we choose to go forward with this, that we make that information available to the CBTA before their July 16th meeting.
Double barrel is better.
I'm sorry, Ms. Evans.
Double barrel is better.
All right, so I have a motion by Mr. Peterson. Wait, did I have a second on the motion?
Yes, sir.
From Ms. Laskowlet. Further discussion on the motion?
I just have a question. Can we see it when it's produced before you send it out? You know,
Yes, ma'am.
I want to make sure that we don't
Yes.
forget anything.
So,
I want Mr. Holland to take a look.
so what I'm going to be, you know, before we have the vote, staff, I'm going to ask you, this is going to mean you and your staff are going to be drafting a letter that's going to be going to our federal representation as well as our state. And that it's going to be sent out to the membership in draft form for approval, markup, etc. And then I would also come back to Mr. Peterson and suggest that we also direct staff to begin a plan for bringing our state elected officials into some meeting with us, as Ms. O'Bannon had suggested earlier.
That was part of my motion.
Okay, yeah. But I want staff to take action in setting that up, because we said in executive committee, we didn't want to delay on this. Okay, so I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
is it the direction to draft a resolution for consideration by the body? Meaning we're just a letter.
I would suggest a letter, because you can get
A
into
letter
more
expressing
detail.
our concerns.
Excuse me. Mr.
Well,
Peterson,
that was my motion, a letter.
a letter.
expressing our
Thank you.
concerns.
Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, and you'll associate friendly amendment with Mr. Hodges.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr.
Staff, you feel comfortable with the motion and the direction that will stem from the motion?
Yes, sir. We'll look at possible meeting dates for the coordination with federal and state legislatures.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Abstain. Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mann abstains. And next topic I'm going to discuss under the chairman's report is something that came up as a result of recent city council action. We had a good discussion with Dr. Newbill, our attorney, Mr. Gregory, and we also had our executive director from Plan RVA come forward with information, and she's going to, if you would, Martha, would you come forward and briefly bring to the body what the three issues are for our consideration?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to give a little bit of a level set of information, and I will rely on Mr. Gregory and Dr. Newbill to elaborate if there are follow-up questions, but Since last March of 2020, as you all know, pursuant to the governor's executive order for the declaration of the emergency due to the pandemic and the subsequent budget amendments that enabled public bodies, regional public bodies to meet virtually, we've been operating in a virtual and or hybrid format for our regional meetings. As also, you know, the termination of that statewide emergency declaration is the trigger for the elimination of the provision that allowed for virtual meetings of public bodies. And so you also may be aware, and certainly under advice of your local legal counsel, that there are certain limited provisions that permit public body members to participate in meetings virtually, but that's under certain circumstances. And as Mr. Gregory explained to the executive committee this morning, that's in limited frequency. It cannot be a matter of regular practice for those body members to meet in that way. Earlier this week, the city of Richmond did adopt an ordinance that continued a local emergency declaration due to the pandemic. And within that ordinance, it does not require, but it does permit public bodies with corporate location within the city limits to continue to meet virtually if it is deemed, I think, prudent or necessary due to the circumstances of the pandemic. And so we had a healthy discussion this morning at the executive committee meeting about what that means, what that information means to this body, and I think the desires and the preference of this body and how it would function going forward, given all those circumstances. And so we at the staff level have a recommendation that given the circumstances and the feedback that we got during the executive committee itself from our subcommittees of the TPO and with the consultation with legal counsel, that number one, the executive committee of the Richmond Regional Transportation Planning Organization and the policy board, this body, would continue to convene in person, effective immediately. That the subcommittees that do not have decision-making authority, so the TPO's TAC, the Technical Advisory Committee, the Citizen Transportation Advisory Committee, and the LRTP Advisory Committee, for example, that those groups would have the option of participating via virtual participation provided by the city council ordinance through that period of time, as long as it's permitted and it's deemed to be appropriate. We think that is inconsistent with the desires of those members in some cases, and it frankly creates additional opportunity for flexibility as everyone's kind of navigating this return to in-person and being able to provide kind of maximum efficiency for the members of the TAC, the CTAC, and the LRTP Advisory Committee. We also would recommend that the TPO Policy Board and all of its subcommittees continue to provide access to the public in these meetings via a virtual format. So we recommend that we continue to live stream the meetings on YouTube using the technology that we have, and that we actually enable an additional opportunity for the public to interact with members of the policy board, the executive committee, and the advisory committees through a more interactive mechanism during the public comment period. And so that would enable members of the public to sign up in advance. They would still need to do that, but they would actually be able to voice any input that they might give to the body, any of those bodies via virtual participation, according to those procedures. So those would be the set of recommendations that I've compiled based on the discussions that we've had. And I think we are seeking some direction with regard to those recommendations so that we can function with some consistency within the sphere of the Richmond Regional Transportation Planning Organization.
Okay, briefly, what Chief Martha's asked for is three things. For the policy board, we continue to meet in person with the caveats that, Mr. Gregory had brought forward, that, if there's a reason you can't be here, then you have the option. The second thing is giving our subcommittees the option of virtual meetings. And the third thing is access to the public, which all of us agree to. To me, that's a no-brainer. So those are the three things. Now, do we have consensus on that? I'm going to ask the our attorney, do we need to memorialize these three decisions in some form of motion that we take a vote on, or do we simply need consensus?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I believe you could do it either way. If you want to establish it as a firm policy of the body, you could pass a motion, and certainly that would be approved action.
I will move that we accept the recommendations.
Second.
I have a motion to accept the recommendations of our executive director on these three issues. I have a second from Mr. Hodges. Discussion on the motion.
Mr. Chair, I do have a question.
Yes, please.
I agree wholeheartedly with the ability to have better outreach with the public. Does this body have a limitation on the number of minutes that a person can speak during is it like a 1 minute, a 3 minute?
During public comments, when people communicate with us, it's not a discussion, public comments, their opportunity to come to us and address us as a body. They have 3 minutes as an individual and 5 as a group. That's been standard.
And Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, please, Martha.
We could at the staff level come back to this group with a kind of recommended set of guidelines for how we manage the public participation segment of the agenda for your consideration and review, and that could be part of a future meeting topic and discussion for how we handle that.
Okay. Well, I have a motion and a second. Are you saying that you can come back later and give us more specificity on the public side?
Yes, I think if the motion that's pending passes, then staff could take that as direction to build
I
the
got you.
implementation plan for this, and we can bring that back to you for a subsequent approval of that plan.
Okay, I'm going to call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to point out.
Please, Mr. Brown.
That the TAC and the CTAC do not have elected officials. So that would be one reason that we could probably this.
Thank you, ma'am. All right. That moves us to new business, and this is where Mr. Parson lives. I'm sorry. We have secretary report.
Thank you, sir. The secretary's report, I'm not going to dwell on it. This information was included in your agenda packet. I do want to highlight 5B, the work status and financial report. This is the report for May. We are in process of crunching the end of year numbers following June, and we are on track to meet all of our targets in terms of project expenditures. You will note, I'll say ahead of time, there are a couple work tasks that are going to look low following the June report. And the reason for that is we had intended at the beginning of the year to hire additional staff and had planned for that in the work program. That did not happen in FY21. So that time is going to be low. But we, as you all know, we're prepping to staff up this coming fiscal year, and we'll account for all of that. The boundary expansion 5C is something that is all set up. It is approved. We discussed it in executive committee. It'll take place. It'll be memorialized October 15th. And between now and then, staff is going to go back through all of our plans, our processes, and make sure that any impacts of the boundary expansion are accounted for before we get to that official starting date. So that's the secretary's report. If you have to take any questions.
Questions from Mr. Parsons? All right, that moves us now to new business. Again, Ms. Parsons, I'm going to ask you to take us through each one of these. So we're going to try to do that every meeting.
Yes, sir. Be happy to do that. Our first item under new business B1 is an update from Mr. Ariel about the Connect RVA 2045, our long range plan. And this is, I mentioned in the earlier meeting, this is a major milestone in the development of the plan process, and it's pertaining to the constrained list of projects. So,
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the board. So I'll be presenting the RRTP Connect RB 2045 update today. I don't know if the screen is can be seen from back, but next slide. This shows the RRTP process flow. We started 18 months back with the transportation needs assessment, in which we looked at the issues and needs and transportation deficiencies in the region at a multimodal level, including highways, transit, active transportation, park and ride, rail, our bridges, and we created a list. We also had public comments and issues listed by the public. Altogether, we had more than 1,000 issues, which was approved by the LRTP Advisory Committee. Then the second phase was the strategic direction, in which we developed goals, visions, and objectives for the plan that was approved by this board in February. The third stage was the planning stage, in which we converted the transportation issues into logical transportation project solutions. So some of the issues related to policy, we actually listed those, but we don't have a solution for those because they need to be addressed in some cases at the federal level or the state level. So only those projects which would be logical transportation implementation projects, we developed that and we call it the universe of projects, regional projects. And we had 268 projects, I believe, in the universe of projects. And now we are in the fourth phase of the planning, which is programming, which I will be discussing in detail and we'll be asking for your approval as well. And once you approve that, we'll be evaluating the plan. And then we'll again ask for your adoption in October. Next slide, please. So just to give you what you'll be asking today is basically to approve the constraint list of projects as presented by staff. And then there's a second piece that once you approve the constraint list of project, it needs to go to air quality conformity. And we want the policy board to authorize TAG to give you the draft regional conformity report and open a public comment period. I'll discuss this in detail. Next slide, please. So phase 4 programming, the objective is to develop a fiscally constrained list of regionally significant transportation projects. So that's the objective of this task. So what's fiscal constraint? Fiscal constraint is basically comparison of revenues and costs, and then we demonstrate that we have sufficient revenues for 3 aspects. First is to operate and maintain the existing transportation system. So that's very important. We can't take any money out of that. The second is to fund local projects priorities, because the long range transportation plan only looks at the regional level, but there are local needs which needs to be taken care of as well. And then the final thing is to implement proposed transportation system improvements, which is basically the universal project. So we need funds so that we can implement all the projects in the universal projects. So if funds are sufficient, then we don't need to prioritize. We can fund all the projects, but that's not the case, as we all know. That's why we have to prioritize those projects. Next slide, please. So this graph is the process flow for the constraint plan development process. We have 2 parallel processes which merge in the draft constraint list of projects. So we start off with the universe of projects as approved by the policy board in their May meeting. We developed the project scoring and evaluation process. I'll discuss a little bit detail about that in the next couple of slides. And then we score and rank projects. Basically, we prioritize the projects. At the same time, we develop revenue projection. We basically gave what would be the funding available to us based on VDOT's projection as well as RRTP's projection. So based on that projection, there's a lot of assumptions made in that. We develop the total funds which will be available to us. And then finally, as I mentioned, we need to cut off the operations, we need to cut off the local funds, and what remains is our constrained budget. So once we have the constraint budget and we have these scored and ranked projects, staff develop a draft constraint list of projects based on the scoring. And that went to public review and comments. We received the public comments. That also went to the project champions. Basically, the localities would be the sponsor of those projects. And any concern the localities had, we addressed that. And then that draft constraint plan was devised so that everybody is okay with that. And then staff is recommending the constraint list of projects, the new list, which was approved by the LRTP Advisory Committee. So I'll be asking the board to approve this staff recommended constraint list of projects. Next slide, please. So this is the constraint budget. So all values are in billions of dollars. So basically, GRPT and GRTC revenue, $2.67 billion. This doesn't include GRPT rail funding because rail funding is basically a state's purview and it's not divided for the reason it's for the whole state. So we don't have that in this constraint budget. Then VDOT revenue includes all federal, state, as well as CBTA funding. Out of that, almost, I would say 56% goes to the programmatic projects, which is basically operations and maintenance, both highway and transit side. The regional projects, based on our review of the SIP in the last 5 to 10 years, that was the basic cut down with what was the regional funding and the local funding. And based on that assumption, we broke down the local and the regional funds. So almost 56% goes to the regional funds, and then 44% is basically what we calculate for the local funds, local priorities. So out of $20 billion which we have, including all our funds, which we expect to have, doesn't include the bonding funds, which CBTA might address later, but this is what we have now. We have almost $5 billion. So for the regional projects, $6.2 billion, $0.6 billion is already committed based on the latest SIP, which just was approved by the CTV this month. And what's remaining is the constraint budget, which is $5.52 billion, which we have, which you can allocate to all the projects listed in the universal projects. Next slide, please. So project scoring and evaluation process, just wanted to give you a background on that. Scoring process complies with the performance-based planning and programming as required by federal regulation. So we need to develop a process in which we look at the performance of the project. So the process is data-driven, transparent, and an understandable process, which leaves no room for personal judgment or any subjective nature of the project of scoring. Score is not based on the better project description or the severity of the current condition. It's basically based on the merit performance based on what happens when the project is implemented. We have tried the scoring process to be fair for all regions, since our regions have both urban, suburban, and rural regions, and all modes of transportation. It's difficult because we are not comparing apples with apples, but we try our best to do that. The scoring process is related, so it's not an absolute process. So it depends upon the pool of the projects. Has a cost benefit element as well, which is required. Each project was evaluated by these performance measures, which basically measures what the project implementation would advance, what the policy would approve as this plan's business goals and objectives. And then finally, this had a long process with the LRTP Advisory Committee, and it was vetted by the LRTP Advisory Committee. Next slide, please. So this is the project scoring and evaluation process, the weights and the goals and the performance measures. This is pretty technical, so I won't go into detail, but the policy board approved 5 goals for this plan, basically safety, mobility, equity, accessibility, economic development, and environmental land use. So we have performance measures within each category, and each goal has weights as well, based on public opinion, as well as the RRTP advisory committee vetting process. So safety, that was the major concern in our region. So that gets the highest goal rate, 25%. Mobility basically is congestion. We don't have much congestion in our region, but still there are some areas, some bottlenecks in peak periods that we get sometimes congestion. So that was 15%. Equity and accessibility, that's an important thing. It's 25%. Out of that, 10% of our scoring benefits the PJ areas, which is basically historically underserved population areas. Then we had economic development at 15%, and environmental and land use, which has sensitive features, air pollution and things like that, and then connection to our population and employment centers, which we call as opportunity centers. Next slide, please. So as with all phases of the LRTC, we had a public review and comments period for this phase. So this was our 4th public review and comment period. So it started from June 2nd and ended on June 17th. We received 133 comments in our Wikimap, which is an interactive mapping page software, in which people can actually look at the project and then see the project and then comment on it. Then we received some comments in the Connect RV 2025 websites as well. And staff also got direct emails from the public. Altogether, we had 150 comments. So we were also looking at how many unique individuals or agencies commented on this. So Wikimap, we can see that we have the IP address of the commenter. So based on that calculation, we had, I guess, 23 unique users in Wikimap. Our most prolific commenter had like 50 comments. So same person had 50 comments. So this was important to know how many unique individuals commented in this process. So 39 individuals, that's how we calculated. So, and comments can normally be summarized into 3 major categories. So support of the specific projects. We see a lot of support for the active transportation and transit projects. Opposition to specific projects. We see some opposition to any widening project, any highway projects. And then there were generic suggestions, comments, questions, miscellaneous things, which is around 16% of that. So no major support or opposition to any project. So there was some opposition, but there was one comment, or there was support, that was one. Didn't change much of what we had in our constraints based on this comment. And all the comments we received is documented in the staff report. I think it's 20 pages. It should be in that. Next slide, please, Nicole. So the staff recommended constraint list of project. We divided it in time band because we are not getting all 20 billion in the same year, right? It's from now to 2045. So we have to consider things like inflation. The project cost which we have is $20. So even if we have $5 billion, if we took out the project $5 billion now, it's going to be more than that. So to do that, we divided projects into 4 time bands, following what VDOT does in the six-year improvement program. So the committed list, FY22 to FY27, that's basically all the projects in the SIP, which we think are reasonably significant based on our data. So we have 62 projects. I think now it's 61. I think one project was removed from the SIP in the final draft. So basically 61 projects in the committed list. That's already been acted by the CTV. So then we have the constraint list of projects in which we have 4 time bands. So basically, first time band is FY20 to 37, and then 28 to 33, 34 to 39, and then 40 to 45. So 4 time bands. Altogether, the constraint list has 194 projects. And as you can see, the inflated cost, $5.5 billion. So we use almost all amount, I guess. There's a little bit of surplus, maybe 10, 20 million left, but we use what we can. And then there is a state of good repair project, which is basically the bridge rehabilitation and replacement, which we didn't score those projects because it's based on the state of good repair funding, which is not accounted for the constraint list of projects. But we prioritize 16 projects, which basically are projects which are structurally deficient now and are in the NHS, which is the National Highway System. So that's the priority for the feds, that we need to prioritize those projects which are structurally deficient and are in the NHS. So we have enough funding to fund those projects, 16 projects. So these projects are not scored, but they are in the constraint list. Next slide, please. And then we have the vision list of projects which we couldn't fund. So 40 projects in highway, transit, active transportation, and park and ride. I think we funded all our park and ride projects. I think one active transportation project in the vision list. Some of the BRT projects in transit are in the vision list. And then the major bulk is the highway projects. We have 40 projects. Looking at the needs for them, it's a little bit more than $2 billion in 2020 dollars. And if we inflate it to 2030 dollars, $2.6 billion, that we are still short of. And then rail, as I mentioned earlier, it states probably we have the budget to be included in constraint list. We have 9 projects listed in our middle list for rail, which is $1.3 billion based on 2020 dollars, or $1.7 billion based on 2030 inflated cost. Next slide, please. So this is the basically breakdown of the constraint plan funding allocation by jurisdiction. As we can see, Henrico gets the most, 31%, followed by Chesterfield, 22% Richmond. There are some multi-jurisdictional projects, basically the transit projects, which starts from Richmond, goes to Chesterfield, or from Richmond, which goes to Henrico, Hanover, and Ashland. So those projects are counted as multi-jurisdictional projects. So 9% goes to that. And then we have our rural locality, New Kent, which each getting 5%, Powhatan getting 3%, and Ashland getting 3% as well. So next slide, please. And this is the constraint plan funding allocation by project type. So as we all see, the highway is the most dominant form. 82% of our funding is going to highway. Transit 7%. State of good repair 5%, which is the basic bridges. Park and ride 1%. Active transportation 2%. It's not that we want to change that, but it's basically we maxed out with all the active transportation and park and ride projects as we think we need now. So we have funded those all, but still it looks a little bit less. Next slide, please. So there is this last piece. So as part of the Connect RDA 2045 process, the Richmond-Petersburg area, which used to be 8-hour ozone maintenance area, now it's an attainment area, is required to demonstrate conformity under the Clean Air Act of 1990. So the Richmond 8-hour ozone area doesn't actually match with our region. It includes 5 of our localities. It doesn't include Buchland, Powhatan, and New Kent, but also it also includes localities from Tri-Cities. So it includes Colonial Heights, Hopewell, Petersburg. So it includes those as well. So for air quality conformity, we need projects basically from the Connect RDA 2045 constraint list, and also the project which are currently the FY 21 to 24 tip. And that would set up the RRTPO set of projects. Similarly, we have a set of projects from Tri-Cities MPO, from their tip and their long range transportation plan. So all these projects would be in the conformity analysis process. So this process needs to go into public review process before adoption. So what I'll be asking the board is to authorize the TAG to review the draft conformity report and then open the public review period for this for 15 days. So once that is done, once the public review period is closed and we have addressed those comments, they'll come back to the policy board in August for their approval. Next slide, please. So that's all I have. This is the action I'm requesting. So the Connect RB 2045 Advisory Committee recommendation on the constraint list of project was that they approved it as presented by staff. Staff recommendation. Staff also recommends approval of the draft constraint list of project as presented. And the action we're asking for PQ is that resolved that the RRTP policy board approves the draft constraint list of projects for the Connect RB 2045 long range transportation plan as presented by staff. And then there is that air quality piece, further resolved that the RRTPO policy board approves the constraint list of projects in the Connect RB 2045 long range transportation plan and ungrouped projects of FY 21 to 24 TIP as RRTPO projects, air quality conformity analysis as required by regulation, and authorize the technical advisory committee to review the draft visual consultative report and open the public review and comment period as needed.
Move the resolution.
Second. I have a motion to approve the resolution from Ms. O'Bannon. I think Mr. Winslow, did you second it?
Yes, sir.
Any discussion on the motion, Mr. Hodges?
Just a quick comment, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to thank Mr. Parsons, Mr. Ariel for their consideration of issues that came up. It's a very thorough study, and they raised an issue, and they addressed it, and appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hodges. We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Parsons.
Yes, sir. The next item.
5 seconds. Please be succinct. We're running behind. Now, your elected officials, I know you have other meetings to go to as well, so we'll make sure you're able to get to those meetings. Mr. Parsons.
Yes, sir. The next item on the agenda, B2, is the Richmond Urbanized Area Critical Urban Freight Corridor designation. Ms. Rosales is going to present the background and the resolution.
Good morning, everyone. I'll go real quick before we could go 3 slides. Right to the critical urban freight corridor. This is a corridor that is designated by OIP. It's significant for our urbanized area. It is one of the, it is a corridor that's been designated as a primary freight system. It serves a major freight generator, logistics center, or manufacturing center, and is important for freight movement within the region. Next slide. We have designated 33.9 urban miles, and if you can click on the map, it should pop us up to our close-up map. I have to swing the right direction. And the areas highlighted in blue are the designation that is suggested by OP. A portion of 295 from Redwood to Pennsville, and a portion of 64 west and east for Richmond and Henrico. And these corridors are designated as part of funding resources. They are voluntary, and they do not impact any major funds. They're just part of allocation. Sorry. And I just said that next slide. What I'm asking is the policy board approves the critical urban freight corridors as determined by OP.
Any questions?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
We have a motion for approval. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Hodges and a second by Mr. Holland. Discussion on the motion. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Parsons.
Yes, sir. Item B3 will be presented by Mr. Bushing. It's VDOT requested FY 21 to 24 TIP amendment.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Next slide, Nicole. A quick overview. We received 2 requests to amend the TIP from VDOT. Both requests were to add new projects to the TIP, and both are projects that were previously selected and approved by this board through the RRTPO Surface Transportation Program. So just as a reminder, the process for adding a project to the TIP We have to demonstrate conformity that's not going to worsen the air quality. Constraint, we have to demonstrate that it's possible within the financial situation in the region, and then we have to have a public review and approval by this board. So next slide. The first project is a study in Chesterfield County on 360. This is a super street study. This corridor was recommended in a VDOT study a few years ago. This is essentially refining those recommendations to get actual projects that can be submitted for applications and for funding. So as far as air quality, this is exempt. It's a planning and technical study. It wouldn't have any impact. And as far as obligations, the obligations are in FY21. It matches the funding that has already been allocated by this board. Next slide. The second project is also in Chesterfield County. This is on Route 60, Midlothian Turnpike. This is in the village of Midlothian. So as you know, you may know, Chesterfield County recently adopted a small area plan for Midlothian. This is basically taking that plan and coming up with actual improvements that they can submit for funding to implement that vision as well. Again, this is FY21 funding, which matches the allocations approved by this board, and it would be exempt for air quality purposes as a study. Next slide. TAC reviewed this at their meeting last month and unanimously recommended approval. Next slide. And for public review, we held a 15-day comment period as required by our engagement plan. It was posted on the website as well as the presentation shared with TAC. And there was an invitation to comment sent out via email to all interested parties and committee members. We didn't receive any comments on these specific projects. Next slide. So the action we're requesting today is that the policy board approves the amendment to the FY21 to 24 TIP to add 2 projects. And it's further resolved that they are considered exempt under the conformity rules based on those exemptions that I mentioned as technical studies. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions? Sarah? Do I have a motion?
Approved.
I have a motion to approve by Mr. Carroll. Do I have a second? Excuse me. Second from Mr. Mann. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Parsons.
Yes, sir. The last item under new business B4 will be Mr. Bushing as well. Draft regional project selection and allocation framework.
All right, so thank you, Nicole. So this item we discussed in depth last month. This is the proposed framework for the RRTPO, CMAC, and transportation alternatives allocations. I'm not going to go into all the details again. I think we had a pretty good discussion last time. But I did want to go over some of the highlights briefly, just what the objective of this was and the scoring that came out of it. Next slide, Nicole. So the overall process, TAC had a subcommittee that was established last summer to guide this process. We met from October of last year until April of this year. And at the April meeting, the subcommittee forwarded it to TAC for their review and recommendation. Full TAC considered it at the May and June meetings and forwarded it to the policy board with a recommendation to approve at the June meeting. And as I mentioned, we went over a brief summary of all the proposed changes last month. Next slide. The major goals of this update were to update the scoring to reflect the goals and measures in Connect RVA 2045, which Mr. Ariel just went over. We were trying to incorporate the transportation alternatives program, so we have more guidance on how we're selecting projects through that program as well. We wanted to include opportunities for leveraging. So as we discussed in depth last month, opportunities to use these dollars to get smart scale or CDTA dollars for the region and for specific projects. And then finally, we wanted to improve the TPO's ability to track these projects as they're developed, make sure that we don't have any oversight. So the first set of the scoring would be for studies. It's essentially 40% of the score is based on, is it advancing something in our long range plan? Are we moving forward a recommendation or a project? And the remaining 60% of the score is based on the specific goals. So the weighting